As he ran trying to fight them off, one of them managed to close the distance, leaping at him. He raised his arm to defend and it latched on tightly, immediately detonating. Once again, the explosion sent him for a loop, knocking him off his feet as he slid against the asphalt floor of the parking lot, cracking and grinding into it a bit. This was my chance. I was close enough. I rushed in. He was still too dazed from the explosion. He didn't see me coming in time. The full round the world was too much. Gave him too much time to evade. I might have upped the power, but there's no sense in upping it if the hit doesn't take. This time I went in for a straight swing, and he looked up just in time to see it coming. The spider bots stopped moving, keeping their distance for the time being, and in the last minutes before impact, moments before impact, he managed to raise his right arm, protecting his central mass as the rocket sword slammed into him. The amount of sparks flying off was intense. I felt the impact of the blade as it slammed into him, saw his feet crush into the concrete beneath him. The vibrations flowing into the handle were insane. I hit him full force and he was still there, trying to block it, holding it at bay, as a sound came from him that suddenly made me feel a lot better about the situation, as he let out a scream, a deafening shout, raising his other arm, trying to press it against the blade in his body, trying to force it back. I took that opportunity to go full bore, ramping the jets and the throttle on the chain to maximum, and forcing the blade forward with every fiber of strength in my body. Finally, something gave. It just so happened to be the concrete underneath his feet. As it began tearing away, the blade forcing him backwards, ripping his footing off from under him. Finally, he came off of the ground altogether, the force of the blade grinding into him, carrying him along with it, as I spun the entire blade in a circle, and finally, the momentum kicked him off of it, sending him flying a dozen or so feet in the opposite direction, still letting out that painful scream. As I could finally see through the sparks and wind, the rubble clattering around from the torn cement, I could also see green blood spattering on the ground like acid melting into everything it touched, some of it even coating the blade. For a moment I was worried that it might eat through, but luckily enough, the blade seemed to deal with it much better than the cement around, as I looked up to see massive gouges into his arms, completely drenched in blood, green blood, dripping off of his arms and scorching into the ground, melting the cement away as he grit his teeth staring down at them. Now that's more like it. It didn't kill him, but I'll be damned if it didn't look like that hurt like hell. You'll pay for this, he exclaimed as he made his way back to his feet, his arms twitching and convulsing a bit, putting off small gouts of green blood that splattered to the ground. And he looked very mad, incensed really. Without any hesitation whatsoever, he began rushing at me, full speed, ignoring everything else. He was so angry, so dead set on killing me, that he completely forgot that I wasn't the only one here, and in his mad dash to get to me, quickly found small, circular orbs latched to several parts of his body, noticing it just before they exploded. 4 of them, going off one after another, sending him bouncing around the parking lot in a series of explosions, one, then another and another. Every time he hit the ground and it seemed like everything would stand still, the next one would go off before he even had time to think. Perfect. My readouts gave me solid intel on what the bots were doing. I could tell which one was going to be the last one to go off, so I rushed at him, waiting for the perfect moment, holding the blade out straight behind me, throttling the engine to the absolute maximum after the final explosion went off, leaving him at his final destination, reeling from the sequence of explosions that went off, barely able to see what was going on at all. That's when I lashed out, closing the distance and making a giant leap, jumping as high as I possibly could, which was actually a bit amplified because of the jets on the blade, swinging it in a massive upward arc and bringing it down right on top of him. Somehow he managed to gain just enough sense to try to mount a defense, reaching up with the arm that still had a working hand on it to try to block as it impacted, crushing down on him, the immense sparks from the blade and his skin connecting, flying through the air, the place where he was standing in the parking lot being crushed into a crater as the force of the blades and the jets pressing down at maximum, gaining the inertia of a full overhead swoop, a flurry of sparks, and a splatter of green liquid erupted as the rocket sword tore straight through his arm. It only took a second or two, and it ripped his hand right off and began digging into his shoulder. Apparently his hand had taken some of the oomph out of it, so I wasn't getting as much penetration into the primary center of his body as I would want, but it was still doing damage. I could see the green starting to spill out as the blade ground its way in. Hear the pained cries of complete agony. Then there was a massive flash of green. By the looks of it, in an act of desperation, he seemed to put some sort of overcharge into the gun on his hand, firing it into the rocket sword, breaking it away just long enough so that he could pull himself out of the course of the blade as it continued its arcing motion down, digging into the concrete and dirt. Damn it, I was hoping that would take him out, I thought. At that point, I don't know what compelled him, how he managed to keep sense of himself, or whether it was just pure adrenaline or instinct. But somehow he managed to ignore the pain of a severed hand and a massive gas wound running into his shoulder to come rushing at me, and damn fast at that. I tried to pull the rocket sword back to defend, but it was no good. It was too deeply buried into the concrete to quickly remove. By the time I even thought about moving myself, he had already closed the distance. And while I can't really believe that he did it, he used what stump of a left arm he had left, like a battering ram, slamming it into me, sending me reeling back, bouncing off of the concrete. I luckily had my pain dulled for the time being, but even with the dulling effect, the fact that I still allowed pain to get through it all, in that moment, felt like a big mistake, because that hurt. It contacted with the center of my body. I could swear I felt ribs cracking, and the impact to the concrete was no more forgiving. Felt like I dislocated my shoulder, and as I tried to gain sense of myself, I felt another sharp pain, a large foot embedding itself in my stomach, pressing me into the ground. a look of absolute frenzy and fury on his face. As he pointed that gun hand down at me, the green glow starting to illuminate brighter and brighter. "You go to hell!" he exclaimed. As in the moment I was next to certain that my head was about to get blown off. He was too big. I couldn't move. Everything seemed to slow down as the glow increased. Damn it. Is this game over? Is this how it ends?